And now, the survival show that once survived a night out on the town with James Price. And speaking of James Price, in this episode, he's back to discuss lessons that can save your life. These lessons apply to everything from an active shooter situation to a simple stick-up. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode 153. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. James Price, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole, brother.
Hey, Aaron, how you doing, man? It's great to be back. I appreciate it.
I'm doing well, brother. I'm happy to have you on the show. I wish it was under better things going on in the world and a lighter topic.
A heck of a month, pretty much.
Yeah, we've had now 2 terrorist attacks kind of recently, and I think the thing that's, of course, most fresh in people's mind, at least at the time of recording this episode, is the stuff that just happened in San Bernardino. And, you know, that kind of brings us to the point today, which is, I don't remember if it was in the private Facebook group or if it was in person or where we were having this conversation, but you were talking about that you feel these kinds of almost lone wolf, self-radicalized crap is going to start happening monthly and then weekly. And unfortunately, that prediction seems to be coming true.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it is. It was actually an article or post I wrote about 6 months ago where I was talking about the rise of ISIS and the types of domestic terrorism that would create. I predicted that within 18 months, that was 6 months ago, that there would be more terrorist attacks in the U.S. and in Europe, but they wouldn't be on the complex scale such as 9/11 or some other bombings that have happened in Europe. I figured for a group that size, even though they gotta have a lot of money and the amount that the intelligence agencies are now paying attention to what's going on, a large scale operation like that couldn't happen. So I guess that it would be like, say, 3 people, 2-3 people would go out. They'd just get a couple rifles, couple pistols, and go to a public place that would be surely a gun-free area and just open fire until they got killed, because that is the easiest type of terrorist attack to plan. It affects the economy. It causes chaos. It scares people because it could happen at any moment. And unfortunately, it looks like it's happening. And then the post you're talking about where I said it's happened every month, then every week, I mean, that was just a guess. But basically, especially when we see in the San Bernardino, at this point, it appears that that couple had no actual contact besides a few Facebook posts with ISIS. They were ISIS inspired. And there are many, many people in the United States and Europe that are, due to whatever situation, be it poverty, perceived racism, things like that, that they're looking for a chance to pop off and a reason to pop off. So I think this one was a combination of probably them being angry about their workplace and being radicalized already. So why don't we just go there where we don't like everyone already?
Right.
So any other crazy person or spree killer, there's always a reason, I say in air quotes, but something that I see happening a lot more as from groups that are not directly connected or funded with ISIS, Daesh, that they are people who are already radicalized, and they're like, well, I can't go to flight school and learn how to fly an airplane, but hey, I can buy a AK-47 or AR-15 or a bolt action rifle or a knife, a kitchen knife, and just go out, and me and a couple of my buddies will kill a bunch of people and get our big basket of fruit when we get killed by the police or shoot ourselves. So it's definitely a problem I see increasing more and more domestically here in the U.S. And unfortunately, there's another side result of the Islamic groups coming out and the radicalized Islamic groups coming out and doing spree killings is that will then inspire just regular crazy people to say, well, there's a spree killing with the radicalized Islamic guy I see on the news every week. So why don't I just do it too? Because my dog told me to. So I see that as a direct result of that. I think that in the future, besides just general crime, which is actually statistically your biggest chance of being killed, though the spree killings bring in a lot of other there's a lot of other math that's added in there, but that will be probably the biggest domestic threat to civilians that we'll probably see for quite some time, because you can't stop it. There's no way to prevent it. There's no way to stop it. So it's just going to keep happening. So in my opinion, the only way to stop it or reduce the amount of casualties is having, the sheepdog, having domestic protectors, people who are well trained and armed that can defend it, that will at least stop it halfway through. Or as we see where all these shootings happen, the ending to a lot of these gun-free zones, which are mathematically incorrect when it comes to preventing spree killings, whatever your opinion is on politically or otherwise. It's just, the math doesn't add up. It's a simple fact. So
yeah. James, let's take a quick break for a message. Visit itrh.net today because, well, that's how we keep the lights on around here. Support the ITRH show and mission by becoming part of the Roving Horde Armada. You can learn more at itrh.net about all the great benefits membership gets you. Things like encrypted forums to connect with like-minded people, access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including a special one that was never aired, a free copy of the book, Owning Your Survival, access to a 1-hour emergency kits for bugging out and bugging in class with special downloads, a private, secret Facebook group, and of course, the ammo inventory spreadsheet. And that's just to name a few. Again, visit itrh.net for more details today. Now, back to James. It's interesting. There was actually a kid, speaking mathematically, there was a kid out of, I believe it was Duke. I say kid, he was working on his doctoral thesis, and I don't remember if he had actually built the simulation software for his doctoral thesis or if he was just using it, but he had done a whole string of proofs using these simulations, and I think he was like, the most recent was he was basing it on the Paris terror attacks once he had all the facts in about how it had gone down, and ran it through. And when he would add in armed civilians into the simulation, the death toll dropped dramatically. And I mean, that's not going to be a big shocker for a lot of us that are armed on a daily basis and believe in being armed on a daily basis or whenever legally possible. But I thought that was interesting. And going back to a point you were making a moment ago about essentially copycatters, that is actually a principle from, and I cannot think of the name of it, and I meant to look it up earlier today because I knew it was going to come up in this episode, but someone who we both like, their writings on psychology and persuasion and things like that, Robert Cialdini, it also showed up again, I believe it was in the book The Survivors Club, where they were talking about these copycat situations that happen. One of the most notable is when there's a plane crash, when a pilot basically commits suicide, crashes a plane into a mountain or something. There is a spike of copycat actions by other pilots for like the next 2 weeks, and it happens like clockwork. And so I think you're right on spot there, that other people who aren't radicalized, they're just radicalized by their dog or by, I don't know, vampire or sea otters, will start just, yeah, sure, I'll go.
Or they suffer from serious mental illness. They're depressed. Depression is a terrible disease that I've known many people suffer from, where you have a disconnect from humanity. And then a lot of these SSRI inhibitors, which seem to generally work on most people, but there's a very small percentage of people who take it and they don't feel depressed, they don't feel angry, they don't feel anything anymore. And then they watch TV, they're getting kicked out of their apartment because they can't hold a job. They're going to be living on the streets. They don't know what to do. And then they say, oh, this guy, went on a shooting spree and he's famous, these Islamic terrorists. So I don't know, I'll go buy a pistol and do it myself. Mm-hmm. So because obviously if you're crazy, you don't really have logical thinking, but you may not be creatively thinking about what to do. It's because the depression or the mental illness has just overwhelmed you so much, your thought processes. And then you see that on TV and you're like, all right, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was interesting, I think, as far as this is the first time, at least stateside in recent history, that explosives have been introduced into the mix. Thankfully, they didn't detonate any of them. And I was actually a little surprised because everybody talks about how easy it is to get guns. It's actually not very hard to make, a trip to Home Depot and you've got the makings of a bomb.
Yeah, people are surprised how easy it is to make explosives, but the key component, which we saw in San Bernardino, is detonators are kind of can be tricky to get them to work.
Mhm.
So fortunately, they weren't very technically proficient, but unfortunately, the future terrorists will learn from their mistakes and they'll probably do it correctly because it's not very hard. If a guy living in a cave in Afghanistan can make a detonator that can blow something up at 8 miles away, then somebody certainly going down to an electronics store in the States can. And those devices already exist in the US, but they're not militarized. They're things that you actually have in your home right now.
Mhm.
So it's not that hard. I see explosives, not bombs, but like they use today, they used in San Bernardino, pipe bombs, homemade grenades, things that they can carry on themselves and then throw at people during their spree, which
Mm.
also happened in Paris. They had, I believe, actual hand grenades for that one.
Oh, did they
So
really?
I believe so. I don't quote me on that 100%, but they did have handheld explosive device that they threw at people and was caused a substantial amount of casualties, I believe. So I mean, they learned from each other. I'm sure that before this couple decided to go on this killing spree, for whatever reason, well, we know the reason why they did it, but
Right.
I probably in their mind to have some sort of grenade to throw at people probably wasn't really there until this happened in France. So that's an example of how insurgents learn from each other because they learn. I saw that in Iraq. I experienced that firsthand in Iraq. They see what happened and then they change it. And like in the example of this couple, this isn't some guy who was working at a hospital stand in New Jersey or something. He was an educated college graduate with a job making I think like 60 some $1,000s a year.
Mhm.
So for someone who's went to college, knows the basic sciences and things like that, they can figure things out like that.
Yeah. Yeah, this wasn't an idiot, and this wasn't a guy that was really, for all intents and purposes, hurting in life. Just decided he was on board with ISIS and wanted to kill some people.
Yeah. And I tell you, those ISIS websites, my Arabic comprehension isn't great, but I can understand some of it. But I have several friends who are Arab or Kurdish and they speak Arabic. And I've watched these videos on their websites with them. And just from the body language and the little bit that I can see, it's very Tony Robbins, Anthony Robbins style. These guys are very
Oh,
charismatic,
wow.
very convincing, and even as like someone like myself who obviously has no interest in it, you're kind of like, this guy's making sense within that realm. So if
Mm.
I was already a little bit somebody who was a disgruntled person within that particular faith, and then I heard some of these guys talk, they're very very charismatic. The ISIS Dash, they now kids in it. They have guys that used to be computer programmers, marketers, internet marketers, things like that. They have people from Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Korea, Japan that are now members with them, and they understand social media. They understand persuasion. They understand social dynamics and how to present their information out. Because before we would see those old videos, it'd be like a flag in the background and two guys holding AK-47s and a ski mask with a bomb vest, and
Yeah.
a dude sitting at a desk like screaming and yelling and acting like a crazy person. It's not like that anymore. Now they're like, it's a guy sitting outside, palm trees behind him. He's like, listen, I understand that things are hard on you right now, and there are many things in the world, but if you come back to this faith and you follow us and da da da, then they'll throw in a little bite about something a little radicalized, and they'll keep going. It's very very convincing and well done. It's especially to someone who would be susceptible to something like that, or would be looking for something like that in their life, like any other cult.
That's scary stuff, man. And, I think all of this also going back to, what was it, like a month or so ago now, when you were in town and we were doing the domestic protector class. Well, I say we doing, you were teaching, I was studying. I thought it was really fascinating. And it was very surreal because that's the weekend that the Paris attacks went on. But it also just drove home for me. I mean, these recent rash with the terrorists, but active shooter situations or just disgruntled employees, I mean, these things all relate back to the same core problem of somebody's pissed, somebody's crazy, and they mean to do people harm. And just the amount of information and the simple techniques and stuff that we learned during that class. And I think we can really talk about some interesting stuff today, because a lot of it too wasn't just wasn't just active shooter stuff. It was also home invasions, and we covered all kinds of stuff, but it was just, it's timely to wrap it all in. But let's start with the active shooter stuff and kind of walk through that as far as where do people begin with what they should be doing in these situations. I guess we can even talk about a little bit before the situations, key indicators, if any exist, and then moving on to what do you do?
The domestic protector class comes from a similar premise of the our mobile scout class that we teach. It is skills from a professional fighter's or protector's trade that was then kind of translated into regular folks, civilians, people in the States, people in non-fighting, non-shooting jobs. Mobile Scout, that was based off of things that I learned working out on the roads in Iraq. And then it was translated to, in the States, emergency, civil unrest, and things like that. The domestic protector, or their skills taken from the executive protection field, which is like a Secret Service guy or a DSS agent with the Department of State overseas, and then translated into a guy at the shopping mall with his kid, going out to eat for dinner, at home, watching TV. A lot of the Department of State stuff has to do with residential security, home security, and just general awareness of what's around you. And then using the same techniques that they use, modified a bit for stateside use, to not only to protect and shield, but how to engage people in those type of situations. So we're really proud of that course. And you went to the pilot course. Actually, the Rabbit Hole, you guys graciously hosted us for that, and we appreciated it a ton.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Since added a lot of stuff, took some stuff out, changed it around. I think it's a good class because shooters and terrorism are things that you do have to work, that do happen in the U.S., but mathematically, statistically speaking, crime is, if you're going to get hurt, it's most likely going to be crime. Just general criminals, robberies, assaults, rapes, burglaries, things like that. So I felt that it wouldn't be appropriate if the class only covered the active shooter thing, because it's definitely a threat, but it's a percentage of a threat. Mm-hmm. So we try to include everything from how to do a professional security survey on your home, like a CIA agent would do for a safe house in Pakistan, but then put to the level of the U.S., or simply open and close your door, your car door when you're out in public. That will decrease the chances of you being attacked or victim of a crime by a couple 100%, it seems like. So there's a lot of small things that you learn that are good for both an active shooter situation, but also for just general crime, because crime is the thing. I mean, I've been a victim of crime in the States. I've been robbed at gunpoint twice. So this is something, it's a combined skills. It's based off of our Zero Conics training methodology, which is, we give you each skill in an individual box. And whatever situation happens, you open up your conics, which is in your mind, and pull out those particular skills. So many of the active shooter, and then just general security, and then general crime prevention and defense can all wrap up into several different types of situations.
No, I mean, that's all great stuff. And I think as far as to start diving a little bit into specifics, I know like one of the interesting things we did while we were in the class was you had Josh attacking us with a knife, and even just the tone of your voice and the way you hold your hand and the way you talk to people. And really, and I thought one of the other fun things, of course, was in that situation, like, okay, what it's really like to have somebody coming at you with a knife while you're trying to also manage a second person with you and draw your gun. And I accidentally did something really cool in the class and almost threw the gun at Josh, but actually ended up shooting him through my hoodie, which was really weird.
Oh yeah, that's actually a real common thing that people who don't practice a lot with drawing their concealed weapon under stress, they'll grab a good chunk of their shirt or with them. And you did it, but your simulated gun, it's still fired. So yeah. I was definitely impressed. Everyone was impressed with that one. We're like, all right, did not bad. It's better than the time you murdered me at the Mobile Scout School, which was completely inappropriate there, young man. But I want to point out one thing. We use a knife not because really robberies and things like that, mostly it's guns. Knives tend to be more certain ethnicities to certain ethnicities. Occasionally it's used in kind of a suburban environment. We use a knife because it's not because that's the most likely scenario. It's because it's scary. Mm-hmm. And one of the points of it is to create this stress level and sense of fear and sense of panic. And what am I going to do? Okay, I need to do this. I need to do that. And from our experience, having someone pull a gun on you isn't that it creates a different stress response than I'm running at you, calling you a motherfucker, and swinging a knife at you. It's people, and it's also people don't know what to do. Can I shoot a guy with a knife? Is he far enough? What do I do? Blah blah blah. So we like to use that as a situation, but a knife, gun, it's the same type of situation that you would build these level of stress where you can still properly operate from.
Mm-hmm. And going back to even, I mean, the use of a hand and stuff like that, because I mean, that was another goofy thing I was doing. I was like waving my finger at Josh, and y'all stopped me. And they're like,
yeah.
I mean, and we had some laughs about it, but I mean, it was really like putting your hand into the situation, saying no, stop, and being a lot more forceful than I'm being right now because I don't want to blow out my microphone. But really, even just using verbal commands and being aware.
Presence is such a huge part of conflict de-escalation, or simply giving off a sense of you projecting yourself as a strong person. Most criminals in the States, it's not their first rodeo, and so they've heard the type of verbal judo or aggressive speaking that we go over in this class. They've heard it before when a cop told them to get their face on the ground. So that instantly sets off a visceral reaction with them. And it also sends off I'll give you a quick example. Like if someone's coming at you and you say, hey man, get away. Well, that tells them victim. All right. But if they're coming at you and say, hey, sir, step away, back up, then they understand that it's just not a regular person. It sets off different alarms in them. And there are videos, you can find them on YouTube, of people who stand up to these guys, criminals and things like that, who are coming at them. You'll see them hesitate for a second. The hesitation gives you a quarter second, half second, second of time extra to think, to process the situation, or for that person, which you'll see many times, simply to walk away, or for them to. Another thing is when a criminal or an individual is scared and he's with someone, he will look at the person or say something to them. So you might have not even known they're two-person, but you're going, hey, back away, buddy. And then this guy's like, hey, man, come over. So it's a possible way to detect that they're not alone also. So, but presence in any situation, even life in general, we've spoken about it before on this podcast, is extremely important skill to learn. And I mean, on the podcast I was on before where we spoke about those skills, I mentioned verbal judo, which you can learn for free on the internet on YouTube, though I would very much suggest that people take that class. But presence, body language are two things that definitely deter crime. Any interview with criminals, like people who study crime, law enforcement, you can ask police officers, they said, what do you look for in a victim? And it's usually someone who's looking at their phone, who's walking with their head on the ground, who has bad posture, who looks like they're not going somewhere with purpose, who doesn't speak surely of themselves. And so simply by doing some very, very simple modifications in your behavior that are not life-changing. I don't like to teach things that, like, for the rest of your life, you're going to have to walk out of your house and look around like you're getting ready to do a exchange for a hostage exchange or something, because that's disruptive. And quite frankly, it's not realistic. No one will do it. Mm-hmm. You got to live your life. So I like to show like very small things that you can just add into your daily activity that will increase your awareness, yet not disrupt your life. Mm-hmm. And one of the best ones is, of course, just having presence, having awareness of where you are, and learning those skills, because it's a skill. It's a skill to learn how to have presence. Most people do not have it. So
yeah, I thought another interesting thing was just the way we grabbed a hold of our principal, the person we were protecting in this situation, and got them into the car while shots were being fired at us. I thought that was, could you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. It's no secret at all. It's just the standard Secret Service, DSS, and private industry executive protection technique, which is where a lot of men, especially men, they have this problem. If they're in an area or they sense danger, they will then walk in front of their wife or girlfriend or children or whoever to like shield or protect them. Unfortunately, by doing that, now you don't see them. So you don't know what's happening behind you, don't know if they're even there. You're constantly looking back at them to check on them. So for any like one or two man details in any protective environment is you stand slightly behind the person, just a little bit off to the side. And in that situation, if a threat happens, someone comes at you, you simply step in front of them, sweeping your hand out forward. While you're doing that, you're addressing the person in front of you or going for your weapon. You reach behind them, you grab their belt or the back of their pants, and you give them a yank and a push with your elbow, and they will instantly flip around. And then from that point, if you don't have your weapon drawn, let's say you're trying to run away from active shooter or something to get someone to safety before you go back and engage, then you place your other hand on their shoulder, almost on your neck. Think like a Balkan death grip. Doing that, you can simply, with the manipulation of your wrist, you can move anyone anywhere you want to go. And at the same time, of course, going back to the present, giving simple commands: run, go left, right, things like that to keep it very simple. But it's actually a very old technique, probably 60s when it was developed, and now it's a little more perfected now. But I mean, that's one of the many things that we teach in the class. But it takes a little bit of practice, but once you get a hold of it, as you saw with the husband and wife team that we had in the class, her husband's a big guy.
Mm-hmm.
And she's, a normal sized lady, and she threw him in the car using these techniques.
Yeah.
I mean, like he was going up against the other door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she was enjoying that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think so too. But she also slammed him into the side of the car, and you'll see this also if you see police officers kind of pushing guys around. It's a similar technique. It's just body mechanics. But so it's regardless of your size or the size of the person you're trying to protect. It's easy to do. And as a protector of loved ones, if something's going on, if there's a crime, a shooting, a drive-by, some guy robbing a 7-Eleven, or some wacko shooting up the place because their dog told them to, or whatever deity told them to. If you're with your family, I mean, you're not going to be like, okay, see you later, I'm going to go engage this guy. You can't do that. You're going to leave them there standing and screaming. What if you get killed? And then they're still there. They're going to get killed too. So obviously the first thing you want to do is get them out of there, at least to a safe area. And then up to you if you want to return and engage, which I would personally encourage, but that's every individual person's decision. But you need to know how to do that. You need to know how to do that with loved ones, civilians, children. And it's a simple skill. It doesn't take that long to learn. So I think that I consider that one kind of the base skill of a protector, is how to get someone out of harm's way.
You brought up a great one there, which was the returning fire part. And that was something that you brought up. And I'll admit, one-handed shooting is something that, I practice a little bit, about as much as I practice weekend shooting, which I'm admittedly bad about practicing those two things, until your class. And you were talking about it, and and it was basically being demonstrated through actually having to do it, where, oh crap, in these situations, I have to have one hand free to be guiding this other person and returning fire from an awkward position one-handed. And you made an excellent point about really practicing one-handed shooting.
So I've been stateside. I've been doing a lot of studying, a lot of research, watching a lot of videos, because my specialty was hostile environments, non-permissive environments. So I've since had to modify a lot of my knowledge for that. And one of the things I noticed from reading a lot of police reports, firsthand accounts, in our the last Mobile Scout School, we had a person there who shot a home invader. And from other witnesses, like I said before, police reports, and then also many police officers in situations where they're with a non-police officer. It seems like a vast majority of shootings in the U.S. happen where the person only uses one hand. They don't square off in the isosceles or something like that, which is, I see police officers doing it, and that's because they have a lot of training and they do it every day. But for civilians and little lesser trained people, it seems that you point the gun and you start shooting at it you just start point shooting with a single hand. You can look at any robbery videos where the store owner shoots back, or things like that on YouTube, and you'll see it's always one-handed. So I've kind of come to the conclusion, especially in the States, I tried to think about it. I'm carrying stuff a lot of times, and I never really consciously thought about it. I'm carrying something, or one of my hands is occupied, which I've trained myself to only do everything with my weak hand. Yeah, I've come to the conclusion that it seems like if I were to get into a shootout in the U.S., because my handgun experience is actually not a ton, because we use rifles when I was in Iraq. So from what I've come to the conclusion is that if I become in a shootout, and I believe the average person does, I haven't really done a real white paper on it yet. It's something I'm working on, but it seems to me that it'll be single-handed. So for me, that's a skill I work on. All I do now when I go to the range, I shoot single-handed. That's it, because that's the way I would feel. Also, I know I shoot well with two-handed. Of course, all shooting skills are lossy skills, and I still, put maybe a couple hundred rounds through when I go to the range with the normal universal fighting position stance. But the majority, I'd say 80-90% of all the handgun training I do now is simply one-handed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I think that's a big point that, I mean, like I said, it's something that I realized after your class that it was like, okay, wow, I really need to get back into practicing one-handed. And
have you done it yet? Did you shoot horribly?
I don't shoot horribly, but I don't, it's definitely not good.
Yeah. It's, when you do like, because the other thing is, another conclusion I came up with is I won't be standing still in the universal fighting position, most likely, unless I do follow-up shots. From what I can tell, the first shots come out single-handed in more or less the position that you're in. You try to train yourself at least to squat a little bit. Once your brain starts working again and you start thinking, which probably most people won't unless they're pretty trained, then you can kind of go into a more normal stance. But you'll be moving. You start doing one-handed shooting and moving, you'll be surprised what a horrible marksman you are.
Oh, yeah.
And that's simply a skill that can only be fixed by doing it a lot, by shooting a lot, training at home a lot with something like an airsoft pistol, learning your draw. I think, like we mentioned before, under stress, if you go to the thinking mode, you'll be really slow.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage anyone here to, if they carry concealed, that they get a exact replica of that firearm. I would say like an airsoft pistol, because you can get ones that the weight's almost identical, to the point that it is identical, and your normal carry holster. And you practice drawing your weapon when you're sitting down, when you're standing up, when you're making a sandwich, whatever, because most people tend to fumble if they don't have that skill kind of locked in. I do it 200 times a day,
Mm-hmm.
a draw, and then draw and fires with airsoft, because it's easy to do at home. And then once a week I go to the range, I fire a couple thousand rounds. I understand most people don't have that ability to spend that kind of money or spend that kind of time at a range or even access to the range, but you can spend 20 minutes at home learning your draw, if that's the kind of person you want to be, which is another subject that I would like to kind of tap onto. A lot of guys, you see a lot of bravado on the internet, and I understand that's what it is. It's bravado. It's like, I'll take this guy down, or blah blah blah, and I'm a sheepdog. Well, a sheepdog isn't really a part-time job. I mean, if you look at anyone like that carries a gun professionally, whether it's military, contractors, high-level law enforcement like SWAT and guys like that, they train constantly. That's their job. All they do is train. All they do is shoot. All they do is read. They go to they learn psychology. They learn everything. So it's great that you get some training and you're okay, and you hit the range once every month or two, and maybe take a few training classes a year. That brings you about, on a scale to 1 to 100, maybe 10 under serious stress, something that comes down. And most people don't take the right classes, which I'd like to go over later. But if you really, really choose to be the person, this subject has a lot to actually is jumping back at the point where you said, where I mentioned, if you decide to go back and engage someone, if you want to be that person who decides to engage someone and you decide to pick up the coat of a sheepdog, then you need to know how to do it. You need to be able to be very, very well trained, because you might stop them, you slow them down for a little bit. I mean, we saw the police officers in France, they were armed during the previous shootings there at the Charlie Hebdo. I mean, they slowed the guys down for a few seconds, maybe 8-10 seconds, but they didn't stop them. I blame that on the department, that they don't train their people enough with the correct type of training. But as you see an example of a trained police officer in France could only hold them up for a couple seconds. Realistically, how well are you going to do with 3 training classes a year, the range every month or so, and then not really practicing anything else, but having the good attitude of, I'm a tough guy. Mm-hmm. Maybe, okay, so trained police officers was 15 seconds. You'll hold them up for 1. If you choose to be that person, if you choose to be that sheepdog, as Colonel Grossman named it, then you have to actually have the skills to do that if you choose to. Otherwise, get your family out of the way. And if you're cornered, at least you can fight then when you're cornered. But what use are you if you are not a warrior, if you're not a true sheepdog, if you haven't trained 3 hours every single day in whatever tactical skill that you need to become that person? Otherwise, you'll do 1/100th as well as 2 trained police officers in France. Or the police officers. Their police officers were shot in several of these active shooters. The one on the military base, where the 2 military police officers, they were shot also. They were highly trained. Eventually, they did manage to kill him, but I don't mean to go on a rant, and I don't mean to disparage anyone who does get training because they do want the ability to defend themselves. And I applaud those people. I applaud the people who get training, get their concealed weapon permit, and carry their weapon. But generally, in my opinion, that's for protection of yourself and others in more of a crime situation. You're talking about an active shooter for whatever reason that they're doing it. Now you are the aggressor. You are a single person going through a crowd, clearing rooms, engaging multiple suspects, most likely wearing body armor and having explosives by yourself with only a handgun with maybe a 3-4 inch barrel on it. You need to have a substantially high skill level. And I can't stress that enough. So if you want to be the sheepdog, then be the sheepdog. If not, don't claim that you are on Facebook because you look like an idiot.
No, and I think that's an excellent point. And I'll admit, and this was a hard, speaking to what you're saying, this was a hard personal decision for me to come to a few years back as Jonathan and Jason and I were going through the different training stuff that we were going through. And I remember making a conscious decision that if I was in a situation, we'll say three active shooters in a mall, well, at that point, I'm not engaging those guys. And the training I've gotten is just to get me and whoever I'm responsible for in that moment out of the situation. I'm not going to try to engage more than one guy that's got an AK or an AR or whatever with my, at best Glock 19 that day, but most likely, a little Glock 43 with 7 rounds. And maybe I've put an extra magazine, one of the other little 7-round magazines or 6-round magazines or whatever it is in my pocket. It's hard to let go of that bravado and make that conscious decision of, I'm not getting into the mix of that. I'm returning fire enough to get myself and maybe, a few other people out of the situation, but my job is to beat feet out of there.
Yeah. And that was kind of my point. It was like, well, also, one, if you're with your family and your kid, you don't want to leave them behind. So obviously you get out of the way. The second is, how effective will you be? Is your life worth holding these people up for a quarter second? I mean, is it really, will that actually make a difference? Yeah, maybe you'll save one life. And, it's a hard call.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it's a hard call. If you go in there, because you're going to get killed if you're not up to a very good skill level where you have a lot of stress indoctrination training, a lot of trigger time, you are going to get killed when you go in there. And like I said, police officers in Europe, they hold them off for 15 seconds. You maybe hold them off for a second. That 1 second may surely save them from shooting one person during that second that they had to engage you, or maybe the 4 or 5 seconds that they kind of get themselves back together after that. But I can't make that call for anyone else. But the larger part of my point was, if you want to be that guy to engage them, then have the skills to do it. Don't show up to go fishing with a pencil with a string on it. It's you show up with a professional rod. And the sheepdog, the domestic protector, he or she is a professional. A professional meaning the academic dictionary term of, this is what you do for a living. Even if it's not your job, but you do it like you do for a living. And it's certainly not even realistic for the majority of people. They have family, they have responsibilities, physical limitations, and it's not a very good lifestyle. I got a lot of buddies. It's like last summer. It's real hot here in Virginia, real humid. They come over and I'm sleeping on a cot with no air conditioning, and it's 1 billion degrees with humidity and everything. And I'm sitting on the floor because I don't like to use chairs. I sit or stand because I think it helps your muscle abilities and things like that. So they think I'm a crazy person, but you know what? Speaking of Facebook memes again, I mean, there are a lot of them out there with the guys living in caves. And it's like, have you trained harder than I have today? And there's a point to that. A lot of these people, especially ones, if they're coming from overseas to attack us here in the States, that's the previous life they have. And it's hard to get up to their level if you're, living a very soft Western lifestyle, which is something that I saw in myself, because I was in Iraq for on and off for about 10 years. And in between that time, I worked in Southeast Asia, and I lived a very certain type of Spartanish lifestyle where I trained, I ate right, I worked out, I read a lot about subjects that were relevant to what I did. And then I did it for a living. And I lived in a little room in a concrete building, slept on a cot, this and that. A couple places I had some beds. That was nice. But overall, being in that type of uncomfortable environment becomes comfortable. And so when you're wounded, when you're worn out, when there's bullets running by, when say a civilian runs past you, knocks you down, and you crack your head open on the floor on the way to engage an active shooter. You're bleeding and your head feels like it's going to blow up. That's the norm. That's your baseline. That's when you're okay. That's when you go take a nap when you're at home. And then after I stopped doing that work for a while, I returned to the States and I was living here, going to McDonald's and having a good time, going out to bars and talking to girls. And then I started up the training side of DVM, and we went out training. And it had been probably a year and a half since I'd been in Iraq between that time and our first classes. And I was greatly disappointed in myself. I was making tons of mistakes that I would have never made ever, even at my absolute worst when I was working overseas. And then even more so in another one of our mobile scout classes we did kind of a pilot thing where we were trying out some different types of force on force. Guys with very little training managed to hit me, I think twice. Now, given it was like, several hours of force on force training, I only got hit a couple times, but I was very angry at myself because I'm better than that. That would have never happened 4 years ago. So that's a point of that the skills are lossy, that you have to live a certain type of lifestyle to maintain those skills. In the overall rant of what I'm going on with, it's not something for everyone to be a protector, to be a sheepdog, and it shouldn't be for everyone. There's a certain amount of people, but if you choose to be able to do it, that's all I'm really saying. And I know I sound very preachy and things like that, but this false bravado of people saying I've taken 3 classes at so-and-so training school and I did this class and then I shoot, every month or every week. And then I go, every 2 weeks. And if there's an active shooter, I'm going to engage them. And you've made that decision that you're going to be the person to engage them and you do not have the skills to do. And you're going to die probably by not having the skills. Instead of holding them up for that 14, 15 seconds, now we're talking 20, 30 lives, say. That's when there's no question about whether you should or should not engage someone and die. That's when the question is no longer a question. If I'm going to save 15 people for one person for every second that I hold these guys off, then you have wasted your life. If you're going to die to engage an active shooter, then goddamn it, be good enough to hold them up to at least 10, 15 seconds so you can save those 10, 15 lives, 15 seconds longer for the police to get there. That's when you can truly make a difference. And if you're really good and you get the jump on them, you just might kill all of them before you die.
And that's a very sobering thought because you finish it up before you die, because engaging these situations, that is probably what's going to happen.
Yes, if you are a single person with just a handgun, if you are truly a protector, or truly a domestic protector or a sheepdog, then you'll be wearing some sort of soft body armor, which will help a little bit. And you'll probably have maybe 2 handguns on you. But no, if it's 2 people and they're 10, 20 meters away from each other, even if they're 20 feet away from each other, and you engage them, and you're most likely be engaging them in the open, you're going to get shot and you're going to die. But if you're good, you'll be able to at least kill both of them before your body gives out on you. And you might get lucky. Maybe you'll get the jump on them, come up behind them, get that first shot out and a headshot from 50 meters with a handgun, and then run around and engage the other guy. But I mean, these are skills you need to have. You need to be able to shoot someone. If it's an active shooter, if you look at where the civilians are and a lot of these active shooters, there are a lot of great shooting positions, but they're far away. I know guys, I've seen it, and I've been practicing myself. You can make really long shots with a handgun if you become good enough, but you have to practice constantly. Yeah. So I don't want to come off douchey or that I'm trying to be a tough guy or anything like that, but it is a conscious decision that I've made. I've made specifically in the past 6 months that I want to get to the level that I could engage someone like that. So, and that's my personal choice. And I have the time and, honestly, the money, because it's not cheap.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things that's a lot of how the class was structured was more about breaking contact and getting out of this situation than it was trying to pretend we're playing a game of modern warfare and engaging 20 guys at once or some other Remo Williams-esque situation for those that get that 80s movies reference. But, I think...
there are a lot of classes that teach engaging active shooters, and I'm not going to criticize that because those are the skills that you would use. It's just, do you have the ability to do it from taking one class? So that's why I personally don't teach people to engage active shooters. If someone at a certain skill level were to come to me, then I would. but otherwise it's kind of like wasting my time. It's like, okay, I'm gonna train you these advanced skills to engage an active shooter or engage someone like that. Now what you got to do is I need 5 hours a day practice out of you for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen. So I kind of feel it's a waste of my time unless someone really wants to make a commitment like that. What's easier for me to do is to teach people to, protect themselves, protect their family, protect themselves if they're cornered and do use their firearm, or if they're directly in front of the active shooter and can't go anywhere and use their firearm. But pursuing an active shooter, pursuing anything like that is a completely different skill set that like Delta Force guys train. So people need to understand that that is a different skill level that is way high up there.
Yeah. And I think, and you were talking a second ago about engaging versus not engaging and going out there actively seeking them. And that was one of the things we were going through in the class as far as what to do in a home. And I was realizing that a lot of that stuff is really applicable to if you're out in public or if you're in an office space, as far as gathering people up, moving to a back room somewhere and positioning yourself in a situation to engage if that's what the situation you're forced into.
If you're cornered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. None of this plain dead nonsense that they teach.
Yeah.
It's just
play dead. Nobody ever.
It's funny, but I mean, a lot of people die because of that. So it's this bad way of teaching. I don't know where a lot of that came from. Mm. Yeah. Though I want to make one thing clear. What I'm saying does not necessarily apply to criminal threats. Criminal threats are completely different. Some guy's trying to carjack your car and your kid's in it, then yeah, you're going to shoot that guy. You're going to engage with it. That's a different skill set. This is this face-to-face. Most gunfights in America, 3 to 6 feet. So that's a completely different skill set that can be kind of learned. That you're pretty good at it. In most of the videos and the reports and things like that I've seen, people with even a moderate amount of training end up coming out on the top during a criminal shooting event. So I just want to make it clear that the sheepdog level that I'm talking about is active shooter engaging multiple enemy threats that are heavily armed with body armor and explosives, and then getting training to protect yourself against criminal elements is definitely something. Take those 3 or 4 classes a year. Go to the range once a month. If you do that, you're going to end up on top. So I just want to separate those two parts of it.
That's a really good distinction. And even speaking to that, and probably something that speaks to both situations, is because we did talk about early on, like there are situations where people might choose not to be armed, or they might be in a situation where they're not armed. But even something simple as using a fire extinguisher. And I thought that was really great. If you could share that with us a little bit, like what you covered with the fire extinguisher and how that can be a great weapon while you're in one of these situations.
Yeah, well, as we've seen, I believe every single like mass shooting event has happened in a gun-free zone, and then a lot of like robberies at a restaurant. A lot of restaurants are gun-free zones, and a lot of people say, "Well, I'm going to carry a gun anyway." Well, that's good, you know what? But some people have security clearances. Some people don't want to catch a felony, So certain people will choose to follow posted no carry areas, and in many places it's the law. So, but there are other types of improvised weapons you can use. The fire extinguisher is actually, I wish I could take credit for it because I think it's a cool idea. But that's actually something that like truckers did, long haul truckers did in like the 60s and 70s.
Oh wow, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, if there was a fight on the side, the younger viewers, not that I'm extremely old, but I'm getting there. It might remember is back in the day, if you had a flat tire on the highway or your car broke down on the highway, the first person to stop would be a 18-wheeler driver. So, which is something they can't do anymore because they got these tight schedules. And that was kind of a thing. If they would pull over, a lot of times they come over to they'd be holding a little fire extinguisher that they keep in the car just in case you're a wacko. And then, as you can imagine, on those at the truck stop yards where they all sleep, the lot lizards and drug dealers and all sorts of weirdos, it's kind of a rough place. It's basically a third world country in some states. So they can't carry guns because, especially at that time, there was no such thing as a concealed weapon permit.
Yeah.
If you caught a felony or even a misdemeanor, you could lose that trucker license. They would use the old tire thumper, but mostly one of the big ones that I always heard about was the fire extinguisher. 2 guys were fighting, got drunk on the lot, and they just hose them down and then stop them. Burns your eyes, it freaks you out. It can stun someone for enough time in that situation to kind of get their brain straight again, be like, why am I fighting in a truck stop parking lot? To if it's an active shooter, well, every single schoolroom and every single building in America by law has to have a fire extinguisher. You hit someone with that fire extinguisher, and 20 of y'all pile up on top of them. You're going to get killed, but everyone else will be fine. So, but in that situation is when you're cornered. When you're cornered, regardless of your skill level, you don't have a choice but to fight.
Mm.
You can lay down, die, and take it that way. Or if you're stuck in a classroom, there's no windows, there's no way to get out. Whatever situation, there's elderly or disabled people there, or too many children, and you're on the fourth floor and you can't throw them out the window. Then at that point, you have to fight. There's going to be a fire extinguisher there. Have one person on one side. It's called an L ambush. When they come in, the person is going to, their eyes are going to go as the door opens. It opens up. You have one guy right there at the door where it opens up, laying on his belly or his back. Hit him with that, then everyone else just piles in on him from directly in front. So that seems to be what's being taught. It has not been used as far as I know. So I'm saying that as from an academic point of view, the math on it looks good, but we'll see when someone actually does it. But it's better than lying down and playing dead and letting them shoot you in the back of the head and then let them shoot your wife in the back of the head. At least you did something at that point because you're cornered.
Exactly. Now, what were y'all bringing up about? Because I know there was a whole thing where it was like, how do you stop a door? And I was, like a lot of people, I was like, oh, you jam a chair into it, and that apparently doesn't always work. What were we going over with that?
Well, a chair has to be the exact height, very specific height for that door. The other is it generally needs to be on carpet. And if you look at like gun-free areas and places like that, most of them have linoleum floors, like hospitals, schools, places like that. So it won't work. And you can't wedge one of those weird kid chairs up against the door. A lot of different things you can do. There's just throwing everything in the room in front of the door. There have been cases in active shooters where they come in, the door's been obstructed, and they try, and then someone else runs down the hallway, and so they go shoot them. So sometimes if you can just kind of delay them for a little bit, that will help. So there's that. There's a door wedge. Most classrooms have a little door wedge, but you can use the door wedge to keep the door shut, not just to keep it open. I've seen one circulating on the internet lately. If it's a door with one of those little hydraulic spring arms on the top, wrap a belt or duct tape around it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been in a room that doesn't have a ton of furniture in it. Just shove everything up against the door. Good luck trying to get through it. They can get through it eventually. They can shoot through it, so make sure to be on your belly.
Right.
Make it too hard for them. Make it too time consuming. There's one thing that these active shooters know. There's a time limit. There's a clock ticking down before they got to pop themselves or the cops will pop them.
What is the future for your domestic protector class? Like we were talking a little bit before, that you're actually making a lot of changes to it, adding a lot of stuff to it. Well, the class I took was a pilot class. So what is domestic protector going to look like in the future?
Well, it's going to be a lot smoother than the one you took. You seem to take every single pilot class that we do. You always get the first one, and then you hear about the cool stuff later.
I know. Well, I mean, we're friends, so you're like, hey, come down and be a guinea pig for this. And I'm like, okay.
We're changing around a lot of the role playing. We're making it a little more aggressive, gotten better airsoft rifles and weapons for that. We're adding in some more statistics, some more. I like math because math kind of tells you what's going on. So we let you know what your chances are if you do this or if you do that. So you can make just like poker, you can make an educated decision on it. Make it. We definitely make it a lot less technical. Prove a lot of the more preventive stuff. We added a use of force continuum, which is something I think is missing from a lot of defensive training.
Yeah.
Going to have a lot more of the presence and verbal commands and things like that. And a lot of stuff, man. I've been working on it all week, actually. So there's a lot of good stuff. And then the current version of Domestic Protector, just like Mobile Scouts, it's peer reviewed, which is something I'm not really sure if all instructors do, but we spoke before. I grew up in a household. My father's a retired college professor. So I grew up in an academic household, and I've consulted with him and spoke to him about, hey, how do I create lessons plans? How do I convey this information? Right. Because unlike when I was teaching with teams or individually or taking classes with the military and then people who were in the military or were in the law enforcement, it's a different situation that you're not required to. So people choose to, and it's a different mindset. So one of the things that I do like to do is whenever I develop a lesson plan for something, I have a peer review, which means other people that I respect in the industry that I believe are very, very smart, because I don't know everything. I couldn't possibly know everything. So I try to get information from like high level people all the way down to low level people. It's one thing I always remember reading about Napoleon was he would keep a brand new wet behind the ears private with him in his command staff. The reason he did that was any information that he was going to distribute to the troops, he would first tell to this private. And if the private understood, then he knew the troops would understand no matter what level they're at. So along with having, say, SWAT or former special forces or guys who are out there shooting and looting right now or out there, spying in Pakistan, spying on spies, I also go to, just a guy I know and say, hey, do you understand this? Does this information come over to you well? To make sure that no matter what your base is, that you'll be able to understand the information and I'm going to convey that information well. So that's one of the things I'm kind of proud of, not to toot my own horn. It's not cheap to take classes, even if a class is $100 or $400 or $1,000. It's money's money, and it's not the 90s. Everyone's not making $1 million a year anymore. So if someone's going to take their time, which time, of course, is the most valuable, I want to be sure that they're going to learn something and get that experience, because I've been there. I've done that. I've had my electric shut off. So I just want to make sure that guys are getting their money's worth for everything from us. And what's the point of me teaching if you're not going to learn? Then it's wasting my time. So I just want to be sure that everyone can gather that information together, learn something, and have a good time. And I'm not going to yell at you like a drill sergeant. Well, for some classes I will, but for most of them I won't.
only when you're the border guard. So now,
yeah.
Now, what is the schedule coming up? Have you gotten the schedule going, and how do people connect? Let's get all that going.
By the time this podcast comes up, the schedule will be ready. The best way to check on the domestic protector classes, mobile scouts, or any of the other classes that we're going to teach, such as force on force that we're coming up with, would be to go to deathvalleymag.com, and you'll see a little link for training, and you just click that link right there. And our current schedule will be up there for anyone to see and register. We got our next quarter's classes coming out. Most of them will be listed up there by the time you guys hear it. So we'll be looking forward to seeing some of your listeners there, and you there, of course.
Of course, I plan on being there for the next one for all the extra goodies that are going to show up in the next version of the class.
Yeah, and if we go out before, I'll try not to get all sauced up and get handsy on all the ladies that are there.
Yeah,
I seriously, dude. I mean, for the listeners who don't know, we met up for a in the Rabbit Hole podcast meetup. Me, myself, and Josh, who works with me at DVM. He's one of the partners there and one of the instructors. And I was like, oh yeah, let's go out and say hi to everyone, have a couple drinks. I got bad.
We all did. I think we actually ended up not leaving that bar until an hour after they were legally supposed to be closed.
Yeah, I know. We slept out in the car.
Yeah, it was a yeah, we caused some havoc that night.
That's a good time though. That place was cheap too, so it was good to go, man. We're going to have to hit up that same place.
Exactly. Well, awesome, man. Well, I sure appreciate it as always. Thank you for, the class. Thank you for the great information today. And of course, thank you for getting me absolutely hammered a few months ago and getting me into trouble with the little lady. And, man, I sure appreciate it as always.
We'll do it again next time, but we'll do it after. So I'll be a little more clear-headed.
Sounds
good.
Hey,
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot for having to, in the Rabbit Hole, host the domestic protector class. And so that was really cool. The venue was really, really neat. Can't wait to get back down. I love Texas, man. I tell you, Texas is really growing on me. I was thinking about Nevada, but now I'm thinking, Texas is all right.
Texas is where it's at, man.
So we'll see, man. We'll see.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Before we close out the show today, two quick things. Visit itrh.net today because, well, that's how we keep the lights on around here. Support the ITRH show and mission by becoming part of the Roving Horde Armada. You can learn more at itrh.net about all the great benefits membership gets you. Things like encrypted forums to connect with like-minded people, access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including a special one that was never aired, a free copy of the book, Owning Your Survival, access to a 1-hour emergency kits for bugging out and bugging in class with special downloads, a private, secret Facebook group, and of course, the ammo inventory spreadsheet. That's just to name a few. Again, visit itrh.net for more details today. One more quick thing. A lot of y'all probably don't know that there is a second show that's been going on for a while now. I think it's actually up to about episode 14. The schedule's gotten a little funky lately, but there are already 15 episodes up there waiting for you to digest. They are strictly on the topic of home security and safety. I think y'all really enjoy it. So check out skycover.com/safehousepod to find out more about it, or simply go to iTunes and search for Safe House Podcast, and you'll find it. Really good show. I think you'll enjoy it. The format's a little bit different. It's only 30 minutes long, and it's pretty quick pace. Check it out today. Again, skycover.com/safehousepod, or just go to iTunes and search for Safe House Podcast. And with that, we wrap up episode 153. As always, show notes, resources, and the ability to comment on this episode. We sure would love to have your feedback on anything we discussed today, along with links to things we discussed in the episode today can be found at intherabbithole.com/E153. From the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.